Risk of Rain 2's Seeker of the Storm DLC has added a bunch of new legendary items from some of the strongest and most confusingly broken items in the game to some of the dumbest and confusingly weakest items in the game. But they've also added one of the most interesting new items in this game, the Growth Nectar. And dear viewer, if you may ask yourself, does interesting mean good or bad? I would respond, no, it means interesting. And I'm going to explain to you what that means in this video. But before I begin, I will say that if you or anyone you know is interested in finding some good guides on the weirdest and most interesting new facets of Risk of Rain 2 and specifically the Seekers of the Storm DLC, then please tell them to like and subscribe to Cure Was Here to hear more content going over the very unique details of some of the certain new mechanics and items added to this game. I say unique, but on a baseline, the Growth Nectar has a very simple effect. It gives you 20% bonus stats for 5 seconds. Now, what does stats mean in this context? In the context of Risk of Rain 2, this is essentially an all stats up. And what that means is when you activate the Growth Nectar's effect, you will gain 20% more health, 0.2% health regen, 20% speed, 20% attack speed, 20% crit chance, and 20% damage as a flat boost once this is activated. Now, I don't know if I need to tell you, dear viewer, but that is an exceedingly great effect. There is an item in this game already called the Irradiant Pearl, which is one of the rarest items you can ever get, and that only gives you a 10% all stats up. And even that was considered a humongous boon for almost any character in this game. And not only is it just something that is great on its own as the Irradiant Pearl, if you wanted to get 20% stats, then you would need these 7 items to not even hit 20%. You would get less than what the Growth Nectar gives you with these 7 other items. So I'm I'm hearing you ask me, well then, Kilroy, how in the heck is this item not one of the best new items added to this DLC? And while I would want it to be, because frankly it looks delicious, and this art looks like something that I would always want on my player. Unfortunately, there's always a sticking point in Risk of Rain 2, and that sticking point tends to be the way you activate this item's effects. And for the Growth Nectar, you have to benefit from 5 or more unique buffs at any given time to get 5 seconds of plus 20% to all of your stats. And let's just say from the outset that getting 5 plus buffs on any Risk of Rain 2 run tends to require you to start looping or to go out of your way to specifically look for buff granting items. On some survivors, it is easier than others. I will go into that in a bit. However, benefiting from 5 plus unique buffs is a pretty rough asking price for anything, which I think makes sense to make it such a hard way to get this 20% all stats up because, like I said, that is a very valuable bonus to get. Now, what makes it worse and what makes my job as the video creator harder is the Growth Nectar is a picky little fella. It doesn't accept some of the buffs in the game, and it does for others, and it accepts some that I would have never expected to be considered real buffs in this game, like the Desperado buff on Bandit. You activate that, that is a permanent, unique buff considered in the Growth Nectar's algorithm. It's confusing. I'm going to go over this, and I think the most important thing to come out of this video for me to tell you is the best way to get this item to be permanently active. Because there are ways to get 5 or more buffs on your character that are pretty much with you always. There are buffs like the Red Whip, which give you a buff on the screen for your speed up, but that'll be lost anytime you start attacking. I believe that is not ideal for this item. What I am going to show you are the best combination of buffs I could find to give you close to perma uptime with the Growth Nectar. And that, I believe, is the best potential use you can get out of this item. So let me show you what I mean by that. I am here with my bandit and my little ahoy right here, the most important button. I have made sure to get to this point with the Growth Nectar and with no other items that could give me any buffs on top of my bar, because I wanted to show you, I guess, the ideal way to get your Growth Nectar running as soon as you can. Now, this is going to be in a highly curated environment since I'm using command, but I'm essentially going to show you the items and the best characters for this item. And the best character, I think, for the Growth Relic is the Bandit, because you can do this. And there you go. I got 1 stack of Desperado, and that 1 stack of Desperado is counted as a buff towards the 5 buffs you need to activate your buffs. I'm going to be saying the word buff a lot in this video. I'm sorry. You might have to accept that. But yeah, even just getting 1 stack of Desperado just gives you a permanent thing for the level. Permanent buff to contribute to your all stats up with the Growth Relic. Now, in addition to that, I think the Bandit is the best character because his shift gives you 2 other buffs. So you can get 3/5 of the buffs you need to activate Growth Relic just by playing this character. Now, I know the shift buffs aren't permanent, however, once you get the 5 buffs on your character, you get a 5-second proc of the Growth Relic. And what is the cooldown of the shift? 6. So you're only going to have a 1-second downtime if you rely on all 3 of the buffs from Bandit before you just instantly can activate the Growth Relic buff again. So yeah, you're pretty much getting 3 out of 5 of the buffs you need just by playing the Bandit and by using Desperado. Although if you're me, you always use Desperado anyway, so it's not really much of an issue for you. Now, I say the best secondary character for the Growth Relic buffs would be the Seeker, because Seeker's Meditate ability grants you stacks of Tranquility, and once you've reached 7 stacks of Tranquility, you will actually end up getting 2 separate buffs that will remain on your bar permanently for that stage. So even though you get 1 less buff with the Seeker, you get 2 instead of 3. Hers are fully permanent. It's not like the shift buffs where they do go down after you get out of your stealth mode. Her 2 buffs are permanently active, and she will only need 3 buffs from items to activate her Growth Relic. And now, onto what's more important for every other character who does not have reliable buffs to add to themselves, and that is the items that are best for Growth Relic. As I said before, there are certain items like the Red Whip, like say, you got the Berserker Pauldron. Those items do give you buffs, but they're usually situational and hard to maintain permanently, so they can be less useful than some other items in this game. I will show you what I found to be the best combination of items to get permanent uptime on the Growth Relic. For whites, you want to go with the Warped Echo. If you don't get hit, the Warped Echo will permanently stay on your buff bar, and even when you do get hit, it'll just come back after a certain amount of time, so it's not like it's gone forever. And I will continue to fail this chance shrine over and over again so that I won't be able to prove any points. Another great white item for this is the oddly shaped opal, because as is with the Warped Echo, this just creates an effect that only activates upon taking damage, and when not in use, it will stay permanently upon your buff bar. So I actually already have all of the 5 buffs I need to activate the Growth Relic, and I can do it right now. Well, not right now because I took damage. Reset, cut that from the video. Alright, here we go. Now, and you can see upon doing that, I gain the Growth Echo buff, the Growth Echo, I'm mixing up words, the Growth Relic buff, and that brought my HP up to around, what was that, 528. And that's one of the points I kind of wanted to make there. You could see when I tried to activate the growth relic that it's kind of odd in how long it can take to activate at times. I don't really know how the buff is calculated. Like, you can see it only activated upon removing my stealth stacks for this case for some reason, and that really lowered the time of the whole buff. So it can be kind of confusing. I'd say if you're trying to use the bandit and his shift with the growth relic, then try to exit out of stealth instantly to get the full uptime of your plus 20 to all stats. But it's like what I said before, you can kind of maintain almost infinite uptime with the bandit because his cooldown's so low on his shift. And what that means is you can kind of just run around the stage with only a warped echo and a singular oddly shaped opal. I'm now running around with essentially permanently boosted stats by 20%, permanently boosted all stats by 20%, which really is a very strong buff, especially as you can see, you can get this very early in the game if you find the growth echo. Because if you're playing the bandit or the seeker, you really need very few other items. You just need 2 white items. You do need them to be those 2 specifically, but other items do give you the buffs. There are like a lot of other items that are workable for the growth relic. I just pointed out the warped echo and the oddly shaped opal specifically because they're so easy to access. But for example, you could also take here, the new chronic expansion item. You gain damage after killing enemies in quick succession, and that damage buff that you get from the chronic expansion is an on-screen buff as well. There you go, see? And that counts for the growth relic. Now, there are some buffs that are really confusing and just don't count for the growth relic. I'm not going to make a full list of all the buffs in the game because that would kind of just be boring, and I think people tend to know what buffs are. If there is something above your bar on the screen, you can assume it will work. However, there are some weird exceptions. Some I understand. The double bands, the Feis and Ire. What the hell am I saying? The fire and ice bands don't actually proc the buffs needed, even though they are permanently above your bar. I kind of understand that because they're not doing anything at all on your bar until you actually hit an enemy and proc them, but it is somewhat inconsistent that they don't work. As for other whites, the War Banner buff is a buff that counts for the growth relic as well, and that can be very good for teleporter fights, but I tend not to think about it because it is inconsistent when you're not specifically in a teleporter fight. You have to rely on leveling up to get the War Banner buff other than that, and that's pretty not, like I said, you just can't rely on it. But beyond that, I still maintain the 2 best white items for buffs for the growth relic are the oddly shaped opal and the warped echo, which, hey, anyone who saw me in the past say I think the warped echo is trash, I have regretted myself ever since making that statement. I have changed my ways. I've become a new man. And look, we've been provided with more greens to show off some of the better buffs you can stack on those characters that don't have access to innate buffs, like the bandit. And I'm just checking through one here. The bolstering lantern is another one that provides a buff, but that's also inconsistent. You have to be less than half HP for that buff to show up, and once you're over half HP, it's gone. So again, not that good for the growth relic. However, what is very good for the growth relic is the shuriken. This is part of the reason I was confused by the bands not crocking for the buffs needed, because the shurikens do, they certainly do count, and I can show you right now once I get my other stacks back that, you know what, they count for the growth relic too. I guess I didn't show you that because that was already happening. Let me show you a better way that I can prove that point with another fantastic green item, the wonderful unstable transmitter. This is permanently here until you get down to very low health. This is probably one of the best items for the growth relic, and as you can see, I have achieved Nirvana. I have achieved infinite uptime for my growth relic. Except, it's kind of weird. I'd ask you, dear viewer, to take notice of the health bar in the bottom left corner of the screen. It is 506. That is not the buff that I should be getting to health, but it says I have the buff. I shoot, I get my health up again. And give it a couple seconds, I'm pretty sure it's just gonna go back down. Yeah, even though I have all of the active buffs I need. So what the heck is happening? For some reason, this item was not programmed to deal with permanent uptime well. I genuinely don't understand why it was programmed this way, because it seems very obvious to me, the person who did a very small amount of testing, that you can get permanent uptime of 5 buffs very easily in this game. So they should program the ability for the buff to just loop itself forever, right? Well, they didn't really do that well, because it seems I need to refresh the buff screen before the growth relic's effects activate over and over again. If I don't, and I just run and say don't shoot anything, you will notice I just slowed down and lost HP. So even though it shows that effect on my bandit, that would seem to imply I do have the growth relic's buffs, I don't. You can do something funny though. It's like you can just see your HP constantly going up and down and up and down and up and down, even though it doesn't make any sense. What the hell is happening? I feel like I should add the Gmod ragdoll sounds up to the health bar to show what's really happening in this game. Mia in post, please do that. Thank you. But yeah, the best advice I can give you are to stack the items I told you about. However, there are more items to stack that work with this. I believe I've gone over the best white items for the growth relic. I maintain that the unstable teleporter is probably the best green item you can get to have just a permanent buff on your screen. However, there's another really good one that was also added in this DLC, the prayer beads. Because the prayer beads, when you gain any amount of EXP with them, they show a little bead with a number next to them, signifying the amount of levels you've gained on that prayer bead. And that counts as a buff too. Again, I don't get why that counts as a buff and other things like the bands don't, but it does. And that buff will just stay on your bar forever as long as you don't remove the prayer beads from your inventory. That one actually does stay forever. I know with the unstable transmitter and stuff like the warped echo, taking damage enough can get rid of it, but no, the unstable teleporter, is one that will go away. The prayer beads will never leave you. They're your friends for now and for always. So if you have a character like, say, the Commando, who has no access to innate buffs on his person, and you get a growth relic and want to actually see the bonuses from it, then my advice for you would be search for a warped echo, an oddly shaped opal, a shuriken, an unstable teleporter, and a kill. And just with those 5 items, you have now gained permanent, quote-unquote, plus 20% buff to all of your stats. I do hope that Gearbox is aware of the fact that these stats are just not applying sometimes when you have permanent uptime, and that it seems to require manual adjustment of your character to make the growth nectar do what it's trying to do. Have I been calling it something else this whole time? I have. Please forget I've been calling it not the growth nectar for this entire video. Maybe I should just rename this video to the ultimate guide not to the growth nectar, because I don't know how to speak. Being a YouTuber is the hardest job in the world, as I'm sure you can tell by all the effort I put into all these videos. But hey, main point of coming out all this, growth nectar, it's pretty cool. I like the concept, I like the stats. Implementation could use a little work. Coding quirkiness could use a little work. But other than that, I find it interesting. I found what I believe to be one of the best ways to always have this effect going for you, which is, I think, the most important thing in making this a consistently good and usable red item. And hey, if you only need those 5 items I explained, then I think it's even possible to get some use out of the growth nectar on, say, runs that go straight to Mythics and runs that don't loop at all. On runs that do loop, you're going to be getting a lot of value out of stacks of this item, because this item stacks very well too. It stacks linearly, 20% bonus stacks every single time. So if you get 5 of the growth nectars, you have doubled all of your stats, which is insanely good. That is a shaped glass worth of damage. That is 100% crit procking. That is double your HP. It's massive. It is requiring 5 stacks of a legendary, but it's pretty damn good if you can manage to achieve that. But hey, that's all I got to say on this item. Growth Nectar, you look delicious. I would love to drink you, but that will have to be for a time outside of this video. And for everyone who's watched this far, thank you so much. I hope this information has been helpful. And Gearbox, please fix the wonkiness with the HP. I'm begging you. Have a good day.